begin Perek Daled of Sefer Shoftim. You will recall that at the end of Perek Gimel, we had the Shofet Ehud ben Gera, who killed the very obese king of Moab, Eglon, and as a result liberated the Jewish people from the shibud of Eglon. And the Jewish people lived in Shalom, both spiritually and physically, for a very long period of 80 years. This is the longest period of any Shofet. And then there was another Shofet, Shamgar ben Anat, who also was successful in defeating the Philistines. And the Mefarshim say, given the fact that there is no number of years, there's no duration that is given for Shamgar ben Anat, the figure 80 is kolel both Ehud ben Gera and Shamgar ben Anat, although the majority of that time was Ehud ben Gera. And at this point, therefore, when we leave Perek Gimel, we're talking about a liberated people, a happy people, a spiritually godly people. But then, as we always see, there's the ups and the downs. The Jewish people get complacent, they get spoiled. The Torah itself warns us, Vayishman Yeshuran Vayivat, when we get fat and successful, we rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And once again, Perek Daled gives us that same story. V'yosifu b'nei Yisrael l'asei sarah b'einei Hashem. The Jewish people continued to do evil in the eyes of God. V'yehud meis, after Ehud's death. And as a result, Vayim Kareim, remember this is Shmuel Hanavi writing this history, Vayim Kareim Hashem biyad Yavin melech Canaan asher malach bechatzor. God delivered his people into the hands of one of the powerful kings of the Canaanim who were not yet conquered. Remember, there were large shtachim that were not conquered, and this king is Yavin, a Canaanite king, who was the ruler of the city of Chatzor, V'sar tziva'o Sisra, and his general was Sisra, V'hu Yoshev b'charoshas hagayim. So Yavin dwelt in Chatzor, and Sisra, who seems to be, it's interesting that normally the Navi describes the war in terms of the king waging war. But the truth of the matter is, Sisra, the general, seems to be a more dominant character than the king. It's kind of the general is more powerful than the king. And Yavin was in Chatzor, and Sisra was in a place called Charoshas Hagayim, which literally means the forest of the nations, perhaps because that's where he would assemble his armies. And as a result, the Jewish people once again are being conquered and subjugated by an occupying power that shouldn't have even been there. Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem. And b'nei Yisrael cried out to Hashem in tefillah and in tshuva, Ki tesha meos rechev barzel lo. Sisera had an army that was so huge that he had 900 iron chariots, which apparently was like the most powerful armor tanks that were known in the ancient world. V'hu lachatz es b'nei Yisrael v'chazka esrim shana. And for the 20 years following the death of Ehud and Shamgar, he oppressed the Jewish people. Now the he is a little ambiguous. Is the he referring to Sisera or Yavin? But either way, we were in a state of oppression. And now we're going to read the story of the salvation from that oppression that came because of our tshuva and tefillah. And we introduce Devorah, Isha Neviah, Eshes Lapidot, He Shofta Es Yisrael Ba'esahi. So this is a very, very unusual type of scenario. We are introduced to a woman whose name was Devorah. Devorah is described as Isha Neviah. She is the first of the judges that is described as a prophet, meaning she had direct communication with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She was the wife of a man called Lapidos. I'll come back to that. And she was the judge of the Jewish people, Bo'esahi. So first, although the pasuk seems to say that Devorah's husband was a man called Lapidos, Chazal actually say Devorah's husband was none other than Barak, with whom she will be conducting the war a little further on. And Lapidos does not refer to a name of her husband, but Lapid is a torch, and Eshet means she was a woman that was oseket in preparing the wicks that would be lit in the menorah in the Mishkan of Shiloh, where it was located at the time. So it's very, very fascinating. Devorah was such a great woman. Devorah was a Neviah. Devorah was a Shofetes. And yet, she devoted herself to what somebody might consider to be simple, inferior work of just making the wicks for the menorah. So number one, you see how important, how elevated, how holy even that simple work is. Chazal say the ner of the menorah is a remez to Torah learning, to chachma, to wisdom. And just as Devorah in her public life, so to speak, was a generator of light, then even in the privacy of her home, she would make the wicks that generated the light of the menorah, that is the light of Hashem and the light of Torah. Obviously, though, the big question that people ask, particularly in contemporary society, is, can a woman be a shofetes? Can a woman be a judge? Can a woman be a melech in many, many ways? Halachically, a woman cannot be a melech. We have a drasha, melech v'lo malka. Halachically, a woman cannot be a judge because the only person that can be a judge is a person that is kosher to be a witness. Kol ha-kosher lahoid. A woman is not a kosher witness. Therefore, a woman is puzzled to be a dayan. If a woman is puzzled to be a dayan, how could Devorah be a judge? So there are different answers. The Rishonim asked the kasha really to understand how could Devorah possibly be a judge. One answer is this was a unique situation, al pi adibor, hayraz shah. Another answer is if both balei dinim agree to submit their case to a woman, meaning she's not imposing her authority, but people came to her because of her great wisdom. So balei din could be makabel anybody. Balei din could be makabel puzzle people to be dayanim. Mimela, this was a getter of kiblu alayu. But even if al pi din, a woman is pasul ladin, the fact that kiblu alayu, that people went to her, shows what her amazing greatness must have been. And then it goes on and describe how she judged. V'hi yesheves tachas taimer devaira. She would sit and adjudicate cases under what became known as the palm tree of Devorah, which essentially means she judged outside, not inside. And again, many meforshim say that this was because of yichud and the like. Bein harama ubein beis el bahar Ephraim, and the Taimer Devorah was located between the town of Ramah and Beis El. Beis El was the site of Yaakov's dream in the Torah, in the mountainous areas of Shevet Ephraim. V'yalu elaha b'nei Yisrael lamishpat, and everybody would come to her for judgment, for adjudication. Vatishlach, and she sent a messenger. Vatikra, and she summoned Barak ben Avinayam from Kedesh Naphtali. Kedesh was a city in the tribe of Naphtali, and she summoned Barak. Now again, from the pasuk itself, you would not know that Barak is her husband. But Chazal actually say Barak is none other than her husband. Vatomer elav, and she says to him, Halo tziva Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Hashem has commanded through Nevuah to communicate to you, because Devorah is a Neviah, Lech umashachta bahar Tavor. Go and pull people from the Har Tavor area. And so this is interesting. For reasons that are not at all clear, the war against Sisra and Yavin was not a war that was intended to be conducted by all of the Jewish people. Number one, there is a specific number that's mentioned, 10,000 soldiers. And number two, the divine command simply says that 2 tribes are supposed to participate. Presumably they were the ones who were most oppressed by Yavin and Sisera. 10,000 people from the tribes of Naphtali and the tribes of Zavulun. They are the ones that should fight against Sisera. And then Hashem says, when you assemble your army, Umashachti Eilacha, this is Hashem speaking, Umashachti Eilacha El Nachal Kishain, I will draw towards your army in the area of the Kishain River, that's near Mount Tabor, as Sisra Sartzava Yavin, Sisra, the general of Yavin, Es Richbo, his chariots, his 900 chariots, Es Hamono, the multitude of the rest of his army, Unisatiu biyadecha, and I will deliver that army into your hands. Go and fight and defeat Sisera and his army. Vayomer la Barak. But Barak said to Devaira, Im teilchi imi v'halachti, if you go with me and give me chizuk, then I will go, because I know Hashem is with you. V'im lo selchi imi, if you do not go with me, if you stay home, lo elech. Vatomer, and Devorah said, Haloch elech imach, I will go with you. But efes ki lo siyeh sifartecha al haderech asher taholech. But if I go with you, you will not get the glory or the credit of your victory, because people will say, Biyad isha yimgor Hashem es Sisra. If God is delivering Sisera even into the hands of a woman who is normally not a warrior, it's obviously not because of military skill or strategy. It's simply a nes min hashamayim. So Devorah is telling Barak, she's kind of warning Barak, that if you're expecting to get kavod from the nitzachim, it's not going to come. Vatokam Devorah, and Devorah got up, vatelech im Barak Kedsha, and she went with Barak to Kedesh Naphtali to assemble the 10,000-man army. Vayazek Barak es Zavulun ves Naphtali Kedsha, as Devorah said, he emitted a zakah, meaning an alarm, to gather together people from the tribe of Zavulun and Naphtali towards the city of Kedesh. Vayal baraglav aseres alfayish, and 10,000 people came by foot. Vatal imay Devorah, and Devorah was with them, so that was part of the reason why they were attracted. They saw this was al pinavi, this was not stamazai. Barak wanted to wage war. Now then it mentions, in Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'chever hakeni nifrad mikayin. So again, we had this before. Yisro's family, Yisro's descendants, lived in Eretz Yisrael. Many of them. Some of them were Gerim, some of them were Jews. Some of them were not Jews. But they were Bedouins. They would wander from place to place to place. And the Jewish people always had shalom with the descendants of Yisro, even the non-Jewish descendants, because of the relationship of Yisro and Moshe Rabbeinu. Yisro was Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law. And as a result, we find that whenever there's going to be a war of the Jewish people against foreign nations, and the Bnei Yisrael are in the vicinity, they're always given ample warning to vacate and go to a safer place. Now, Yisro had many, many names. Chever was a name. Kani was a name, or Kayin was a name. And here it mentions there was a Chever, again, the same name as Yisro, one of Yisro's names, but his name himself was Chever. Chever HaKani, from the Bnei Kayin, which is the Bnei Yisro, Nifrad Mikayin. He was a Bedouin, and he had separated from the larger communities of the Bnei Yisro. Bnei Chayvav Chaysei Moshe. He was a descendant of Chayvav, the father-in-law of Moshe. Chayvav is another name for Yisro. Chovav is because Chivev, he showed love for Torah and mitzvahs. So Chaver, this Chaver, is living in isolation. Vayet ahalai ad alon b'tzananim. he pitched his tent in the area of Alain Sananim, which is next to Kedesh in Naphtali, and we'll see why that is important. V'yagidu l'Sisra. In the meantime, they tell Sisera that the Jewish people is assembling a big army of 10,000 people. Ki ola Barak ben Abinoam har Tavor, that Barak ben Abinoam is bringing an army of 10,000 people in the area of Mount Tavor. Vayazek Sisera is called Richbo. So Sisera gathered his entire chariot fleet, like the tank fleet. Desha Meyos Rechav Barzel, 900 iron chariots. V'yas Kol Lama Sharito, and a huge army from Charoshas Hagoyim to Nach Kishon, again, which is near Har Tavor. Vataimer Devairel Barak, and then Devaira tells Barak, "Come, get up, ki zeh hayom asher nasan Hashem es Sisra biyadecha." This is the day, the miraculous day, that Hashem will deliver Sisra and his army into your hands. Halo Hashem yatsa lefanecha. It is God that is before you that is going to fight your battle. Vayered Barak mehar Tavor. So Barak descends the top of Mount Tavor to the valley. Aseres alofim ish acharav, and 10,000 people follow. Again, this is yet another example of the fact that in Judaism, in a Jewish army, the general leads. The general is not in the back. The general is in the front of the army, and the 10,000 people come after him. And what happened was, Vayom Hashem es Sisra v'eskol harechav v'eskol hamachne lefi charev v'nei Barak, that although Sisra presumably was a larger army, was a stronger army, was a better trained army, but somehow they got confused, they got samished, they started killing each other, friendly fire, so to speak. They were killing their own soldiers. And it also mentions that they were trapped in Nachal Kishon. They were trying to cross this river or this stream. It wasn't even such a big river. And they got stuck in the mud and they couldn't move and they got samished and they started killing each other. Vayered Sisra mi'alam merkava, and Sisra abandoned his chariot by Yonas Baraglav. So again, when push comes to shove and his army is getting defeated, Sisra abandons ship and runs for his own personal safety. Barak radaf acharei harecha v'acharei hamachna. Barak and his army pursued the chariots that were going back to Charoshas Hagoyim and the rest of the camp all the way to Charoshas Hagoyim. He wasn't looking for Sisera at that point. Vayipo kol machna Sisera lefi charev. And whoever wasn't killed in the friendly fire, Barak and his army were able to kill all of the camp of Sisera. Lo nishar ad echad. The army was destroyed. Now, what happened with Sisera? So now we're going to see why we mentioned Chever Hakeni. Again, according to many Mefarshim, he was not even Jewish. He was just a descendant of Yisrael. The Sisera nas baraglav el ayel Yael Eshes Chever Hakeni. Sisera no longer has a chariot. He abandoned his chariot. He got stuck in Nachal Kishain, and he fled to the tent of Yael, who was the wife of Chever Hakeni. Ki shalom bein Yavin melech Chatzor ubein beis Chever Hakeni. Because Sisera knew that Chever Hakeni, who for some reason the husband is not around here, this is described as the tent of Yael. Where's the husband? I don't know. But Sisera knew that there was a peace treaty between the family of Chever Hakeni and Yavin melech Chatzor. So he figured this was a safe house. Vateitze Yael likras Sisera. And Yael went to greet Sisera. She recognized him. Vataimer elav Surah Adoni Surah Elai. Come to my tent. Al tira. Do not be afraid. I will give you shelter. I will give you protection. Vayasar Elaha Ehela. And he turned into her tent. And he was cold and he was shivering. Vatechaseu bashmicha. And she covered him with a blanket. So initially there was kind of a tenderness. She covered him up to let him sleep or let him rest. Vayomer Elah, and he said to her, Hashkini na ma'at mayim, please give me a little bit of water. Ki tzamesi, I am so thirsty. Vatiftach es noid hachalav. And instead of giving him water, she opened up a container of milk. Now, milk, Rashi says milk brings on sleep, but many say this was fermented milk. And to this very day, the milk can be so fermented that it literally produces an intoxicating effect. And Rashi simply says, milk, even regular milk, brings on sleep. So this made him sleepy. And he said, Vayomer Eleha Amoid Pesach ha'ohel. Stand by the entrance of the tent because they're going to be looking for me. If anyone asks you, did you see Sisera? V'yamar yesh poish, is there a man here? V'yamrit ayin, please say no. Again, it's a very strange thing. If I suspected that Yael was giving shelter to Sisera, I wouldn't just take her word that nobody's there, but apparently, once again, Yael was known as a reliable and trustworthy. Again, it's hard to understand. If Yael's family is known as being on good terms with Yavin, why would Bnei Israel trust her? On the other end, it seems that they did trust her. And Memela, if she would say no, they wouldn't go any further. So now, Yael has the sleeping General Sisera on his bed, snoring away. Vatikach Yael Eishes Chever Akeni Es Yesad Ha'oyel. She took a tent stake, a big piece of wood that you would use to hold down a tent. Vatasem es hamakeves biyada, and she took a hammer in her hands, and she was going to drive the tent stake into his head. Vatava elav balat, she came to him quietly. Vatiska es hayased barakasei, she drove the tent stake into his temples of his forehead. Vatitznach bioretz, and he fell to the ground. V'hu nirdam, and he had been sleeping all along. Vayoav, and he had been totally exhausted. Vayomot, and he died. She killed Sisera. Now, I understand when you read the story, it seems like this was such a cruel thing. Here is a man who is shivering, he's not well. He needs to sleep, he needs a little water. You feel almost a rachamim for him in this picture. And now she goes and she kills him in his sleep. But you have to remember that this is part of what the Navi is trying to say, that although Sisera presented an image that would seem to call for rachamim, and I assume it must have been difficult for her to make this decision. But Sisera was a Hitler. Sisera was a mass murderer. Sisera was one who countless men, women, and children were treated without rachmanis. It's as if it's as if Hitler would show up shivering and asking for food. Would it be kindness to save such a person? Or would it be the greatest rachamim to destroy such a person? So I actually feel that the Navi wants to portray Sisera in almost a sympathetic light, so you'll understand the avodah that Yoel had to do. In the meantime, V'hinei Barak rodeh v'Sisera. Barak is now looking for Sisera after he destroyed the army. V'teitze Yoel l'kraso, and Yoel came out of the tent. V'taimer lo, and she said to him, Lech kam ve'arekka et ha'ish asher atam avakesh. I will show you the man that you're looking for. V'yavo eleha, and Barak came to Sisera's, to Yoel's tent. V'hinei Sisera neifel mei, Sisera is fallen dead. Hayased barakasai, and the tent stake is in his forehead. Now, killing Sisera was not just killing Sisera, but the army was destroyed. Sisera was destroyed. As a result, Yavin no longer had any power. So again, we're still stuck with him. We still have that perennial problem that we did not conquer the kings we had to conquer. Yavin is still there. But he only has his city. He no longer has any control over Am Yisrael. And that's what the Pasuk says, Vayachna Elokim b'yaymahu eis Yavin melech Canaan l'fnei b'nei Yisrael. On that day, God subjugated Yavin Melech Canaan under the rule of Bnei Yisrael. Vatelech Yad Bnei Yisrael haloch v'kasher al Yavin Melech Canaan, and the power of Bnei Yisrael over Yavin Melech Canaan grew more and more, and eventually, what should have happened all the way at the beginning, did in fact occur. Ad asher hechrisu eis Yavin Melech Canaan. So Baruch Hashem, the end result of this was, not only did they throw over the yoke of Yavin Melech Canaan, but Yavin and his kingdom were destroyed, and that territory was conquered and added to Eretz Yisrael. So this is the description of the overthrow of Yavin Melech Hatzor by the defeat of his army, and by Yael, Eishes Chaver Akeni, killing Sisera.